Welcome to Give Back, Give Black, a fireside chat with Dr. Betty Kilby Fisher Baldwin and Phoebe Kilby, co-author of Cousins, Connected Through Slavery. A Black woman and a white woman discover their past and each other. I'm Karis Jackson, the Chief Operating Officer at Poise Foundation. It is my great honor to host tonight's event, which is one of our year-long anniversary activities. For 40 years, the Poise Foundation has given back to the Black community, helping to achieve self-sustaining practices through strategic leadership, collective giving, grant making, and advocacy. This year, as we mark 40 years of philanthropy, we invite you to join our celebration. From now until the end of the year, we will host a series of events to celebrate Black excellence. We'll feature the foundation's accomplishments, our grantees and supporters, such as those who are tuning in this evening. The events also provide an opportunity for you to support Poise, one of the oldest Black community foundations in the United States, and support organizations that strengthen the Black community and the Black family. We're excited to announce that the first 50 donors who make a general unrestricted contribution will receive a free copy of Cousins. All you have to do is put Cousins in the memo line when you make a donation. And if you choose to buy this book, all of the proceeds from the sales are donated to the Kilby Family Scholarship Fund, which is housed here at the Poise Foundation. The scholarship fund arose from a phone call. Imagine if you received a call from a long-lost relative who tells you that they suspect that their family enslaved your ancestors. That's exactly what happened to Betty Kilby Fisher Baldwin when her cousin Phoebe reached out. Betty, you weren't upset to receive the news. Instead, you developed a relationship with Phoebe.
From slaves. So hello everyone, my name is Betty Kilby Baldwin and I am descended from slaves. Phoebe and I were inspired to meet and get to know each other by coming to the table, an organization and a movement that focused on racial reconciliation through honest truth-telling, deep connections, racial reconciliation, genuine forgiveness, and sincere actions to make amends for the harms of slavery and its legacies. The name Coming to the Table refers to Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. I have a dream that the sons of former slaves and of former slave owners will be able to sit down at the table of brotherhood together, and we say sisterhood. The book Cousins is our coming to the table story.
Hello, everyone. I'm Phoebe Kilby, a descendant of persons who once enslaved Betty's family, and we have come to the table. I discovered coming to the table when I came to work for the Center for Justice and Peace Building at Eastern Mennonite University, a small college in Harrisonburg, Virginia. That was 2006. Now, I had always had inklings that my father's family, the Kilbys, might have owned slaves, but he and the family, they just never talked about it. I don't think I even wanted to contemplate it, really. But I know that the family had deep roots in Virginia, even though I grew up in Baltimore. And I knew that they owned slaves. I mean, that they owned farmland, I should say, in Virginia, and had been there a long time. But there were other things that made me suspicious. One was, frankly, my father's attitudes when I was growing up. He often spoke disparagingly of Black people, and that's a kind way to put it. Also, later in life, when I moved to Virginia's Shenandoah Valley in 1994, I noticed that there were Kilbys in the local newspaper, and they were Black, and they were activists. But still, I didn't look into it. It was coming to the table, this organization that gave me the courage to explore this aspect of my family's history. I began the research and quickly found that my family had enslaved people. But who were descendants of those persons? It's very difficult to find out. But in my online research, I found Betty, and she had written a book entitled Wit, Will, and Walls. When I read it, I just knew that our families were connected. For example, from the book, I learned that her father grew up on a farm that was located within a mile of where my father's family farm was in Rappahannock County, Virginia. You would think that my father would have told me about Betty's father, and her father would have told her about my father. Neither one of them mentioned this. But I learned a lot more from Betty's book. I learned that she and her family had been leaders in integrating the Warren County High School in Front Royal, Virginia in 1958 and 1959. It's an overwhelming story of bravery and grit. Betty will tell you more about this in a few minutes. But at this point, when I was doing my research, I did not have proof that our families were connected. I confided in a fellow, one of the founders of Coming to the Table, named Will Hairston. He said, Phoebe, if you want to find out the answer, whether you are connected to Betty, you're going to have to contact her. Next week is Martin Luther King Day. That would be a good day to do it. Wow. You know, I had just figured out that my family had enslaved people, and now I was being encouraged to contact a potential descendant the next week. But I decided, you know, this is what I should do. So I'm going to read you the email I sent to Betty on January 15th, 2007, Martin Luther King Day. Dear Betty Kilby Fisher, that's her name at that time. My name is Phoebe Kilby and I am white. My father grew up in Rappahannock County, Virginia, near where your father grew up. I have been doing some research on my family and have also read your book. Having no definitive answers, I suspect that our families had some kind of relationship in the past. I admire very much your courage and the courage of your father and family during the civil rights era and since. It would be an honor to talk to you and meet you someday. I live about 25 miles from Front Royal. Through conversations, we both might find out a little more about our family's pasts. Martin Luther King had a dream that the sons of former slaves and slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. Perhaps we as daughters can contribute to fulfilling that dream. I hope to hear from you and to hear that you are interested in conversing with me. Well, a day went by, a week, 2 weeks, no answer from Betty. And I thought, oh, she doesn't want to talk to me. She doesn't want to talk to a person like me. But my friends at Coming to the Table wouldn't let me get by with not doing more. They said, send a longer email. Tell more about yourself. So I did. And sure enough, within an hour or so, I got a response from Betty. I got an email from her, and it was entitled, Hello, Cousin. So now I'd like to hand the mic over to Betty, who will provide her perspective on our meeting and also tell you her amazing story. Betty?
Phoebe suspected what I'd known practically all my life. Therefore, it was only natural for me to respond, hello, cousin. I wrote, Phoebe, if you're asking yourself Why I'm so emotional. The Cultural Innovations email address gets full of spam mail and is often down. I went to that site this morning and emails began to download. It could only have been God. We are the key to healing. Meeting you today is so awesome. People will find it hard to believe. I can't believe it. I've always known that we were descended of slaves, but I couldn't open that door. I want you to come to all 3 events. I want you to introduce yourself and talk about our connection. Bring your camera crews from coming to the table. We can not only contribute to Dr. King's dream, but we can bring about racial healing and reconciliation to a nation of hurting people. I thank God for bringing you into my life. Signed, Betty Kilby Fisher. Well, I was going around the world and selling my book and talking about forgiveness and love. The last thing I expected was a white woman calling me and challenging me to live Dr. Martin Luther King's dream. But here she was. A documentary based on my book, Whitwell and Walls, was about to premiere. Without thinking, I accepted the challenge and invited Phoebe to our family dinner and the premiere of Whitwell and Walls. I forgot to tell my family who was coming to dinner. We met at the Mill restaurant. I asked for the table facing the door so I could see her when she came through the door. When I saw 2 white women walk through the door, I instinctively knew who they were. She showed up, no sign of fear. She was doing the very thing that I had done so often in my career. Man, she was just like me, only in a different color. Our family was gracious, but there were a few mutterings like, "What are you coming for? How long are you going to hang around? Where's my 40 acres and a mule?" At the premiere, I introduced Phoebe and her sister as my cousins. I told the audience, tonight we are living Dr. Martin Luther King's dream of sons of former slaves and former slave owners coming to the table of brotherhood. It was truly a night to remember. Then we played the documentary. You will see that now.
See supreme being seen as many things, but no one seems to see love reigns. Emotional cascade, wet all, bathe them in a sense of self-confidence and purpose before and after the sermons, all the preaching. What are we teaching the children? Teaching one another.
So much of the focus on civil rights history and scholarship has been on the triumphs and the strategies to achieve those triumphs. And so the focus was on those legal cases and how they constructed an argument and put the community behind these children and then got them into the school and then left them in that school.
Betty Kilby Fisher's story takes us to a deeply personal place in which we have to face some of what happened to individual students as a result of efforts to desegregate the schools.
What she is accomplishing now is something that Americans never accomplished in 1900. We've never had an opportunity to look back over the dark history of slavery and race relations in our country and to look these institutions squarely in the eye and to seek understanding and reconciliation.
Much of the beauty of her book is in the complexity, and the soul loves complexity. Things aren't neat and cut and dried.
As she's been telling to many people during the last several years, helping move that shift in the center of gravity in American history ever farther forward, helping us all come to grips with all aspects of our history.
When I heard him cry out, and he was saying, "Lord, I stretch my hands to thee. No other help I know." And I moved in to get closer, and he was crying. And I got scared.
Education was so important to the Kilby family, especially Betty's father, because he had lost land. He felt like had he been more educated, he would have been able to hold on to that land. And so what we learn is a young child who has agreed to be a plaintiff in one of the many cases that the NAACP litigates throughout Virginia ends up being a victim on more than just a peripheral level. We like to think that Virginia is like the cradle of Southern society, some would say American society. And so people are very aware of their place in Virginia, and they're very aware of stepping out of their place. And so for people to push during the Civil Rights era to step out of out of the status quo was just like an affront to civility, to gentility.
The first event occurred on September the 15th, 1958, when Judge Sabloff ruled that based on the landmark Supreme Court decision, they couldn't deny me and 22 others from attending the only high school in the county. The governor of Virginia closed our schools rather than to comply with Sabloff's rulings. My school became the first school in the history of our nation to close because of the massive resistance loss.
They actually believed, some of them, that if they resisted enough that they would get the Supreme Court to come to its senses and that the Supreme Court would change its mind. To me, massive resistance instead really exploded the myth that Virginia somehow presided over a superior system of race relations, that in fact that white supremacy in Virginia was always based upon the inferiority of African Americans and a belief that blacks were inferior, and that while perhaps there was more latitude for blacks in Virginia to advance economically and educationally, there was always a limit to that.
There is such strong feelings against desegregating the schools that the whites in power will close the schools before they will integrate the schools. This has an emotional and a psychological impact on the black child.
Like water drops on dry earth's surface, one may search this globe 77 years, neither close nor near the truth. Religion may substitute for faith till all faith in religion, not God. Making someone else's decisions within your own life, your soul just ain't right, might be that it lacks love.
So it's not till 1958 that these court cases have made their way through the system, and that you finally have a series of judges in different parts of the state ordering that black students be admitted into the white schools in Warren County, Charlottesville, and Norfolk.
And the car stopped at the foot of the hill. And for a long time I wondered why they made us walk through that crowd. And as I got out the car, the reporters and policemen, people were all lined up. And I walked past this big old fat white woman, and she yelled, "We're gonna kill all you little niggas." And I remember Jimmy pushing me in the back because I had just paralyzed for a minute. And I remember saying, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want."
It's not that moment you walk in the door of the schoolhouse and that's it. It's the day-to-day grind. She said that not one white person reached out to her or befriended her. And it's such a simple thing, such a small act of kindness, but no one did it. And part of it, well, the main reason they didn't was fear, that they might have even wanted to, but were afraid how others would treat them.
I could prepare for a test. Just knew that I was going to make an A on that test. Somebody would come along and say something mean and ugly, and that rage that I recognized came forth. And in the midst of rage, you can't think.
Those children, all of the children, the nameless children, were the soldiers who went out there and fought that battle day after day, because it really was a war.
I always felt guilty about going through the auditorium because the school officials oftentimes locked those doors. And they locked those doors with the purpose of keeping us from crossing over. And it was probably something that was going to keep us safe. And yet I continually went through those doors.
She was beginning to feel confident, beginning to let her guard down. And unfortunately, that's when other people took advantage and she was raped. Then all of a sudden, it's taken from her. You almost feel yourself being catapulted down this tunnel when she went into this deep depression.
Of course, that would be one way in which the system of white supremacy would target Black activism.
When I was reading her book and thinking about that attack that she suffered in the auditorium, and I can imagine how traumatized she must have been. And then when she went on to mention in the book how she never told anybody about it, and I thought that is so typical. That happens so many times. I've uncovered so many incidents of that, but that's because Black women and girls even were taught never to put themselves in situations where they would be in jeopardy because their men could not do but so much to protect them. And if those men were called upon to protect them, then they themselves would be in jeopardy. So Black girls and women shoulder the responsibility not just for their own well-being, but for the well-being of men.
Those were some of the real consequences that people experienced as a result of massive resistance.
Perhaps I see things differently, like peace between you and me is the natural order of interaction, acting like we all God's children, regardless of the factions we fall into or the composition of our genetic tissue. We are human beings, one and the same. Shame we can't hold hands and profess love for one another, my sisters and brothers of the divine creation. What is it you are waiting for? Apocalypse?
Token desegregation really defines the initial wave. It's really not until the late 1960s, early 1970s that you have any sort of meaningful desegregation in the state of Virginia.
NAACP lawyers fought and won more cases in Virginia than in any other place, and just continually hammered away on every front. You began to have Virginia really standing out as a leader in a different way than it had previously.
I applied for another management position. Mr. Baker, the personnel manager, he invited me into his office and he shut the door. I should have known I was in trouble. He said, "What do you want now? How many ways do I have to tell you? You're never gonna get anywhere around here because you don't have the experience and you won't get it either." When I got to the car, I said, "Why, God, why? Why me?" I knew he was gonna make me fight. And all the way home, I argued, "God, no, please don't make me do this."
This experience, which for many years quieted Betty, impacted her becoming a strong, decisive, assertive woman.
Her spirit is so indomitable that she persists.
I persevered, and in 1986, I became the highest ranking African-American female at that Fortune 500 company. They gave me a $100,000 education, and baby, I'm using it now.
She still feels the pain of those experiences, and yet she's managed to resist the hatred and bitterness that can come out of it.
I gave a book to a young woman once, and she had done a good deed for me. A couple of days later, I got an email from her, and the email read, "That what you said happened to you when you were a little girl happened to me. My life has been blessed by your story.
The current direction of scholarship is to begin to examine the stories of the lesser knowns. And in that, you get not only the triumphs, you get the tragedies. You get the other side of the story, which is what we need in order to fairly evaluate the period that has passed so that we can figure out what avenues we need to take to continue to make progress.
We cannot just present our kids with a picture and a model of perfect success and overcoming, because that isn't very realistic. You know, there's a lot of pain involved in those sorts of struggles, and we do a disservice to our children if we don't share that.
To share with us and to share with the world things that she did not, that she could not even voice to her own family, helps us to understand where some of the anger and rage comes from as a result of living and existing in a racist society.
The lost cause idea that the Civil War was not fought over the issue of race, but of Southern rights, that race was no problem in the South before the Civil War, closed off any open public discussion of these very troublesome issues.
Increasingly, as we tell the story of people like Betty, and we encourage those people to tell their own stories, then these 13-year-old girls and boys and other young people will realize you don't have to be Dr. King. You don't have to be Julian Bond. You don't have to be Ruby Doris Smith Robinson. You don't have to be famous. These were young folks. Some of them in Birmingham were 8, 9, 10 years old who were willing to go to jail. So if you begin to show people that these were people like them who were the agents of change, it can help to liberate them to the point where they understand they can actually do something. They don't have to wait for somebody to show them the way.
Now allow these thoughts to soak into your better consciousness and grow flowers in your mind. Reclaim the beauty of mankind, for while I sat seeking life, I almost looked beyond love, but now love is all that is within my sight.
Wow. If you put yourself in my shoes, what would it take for you to go from being terrorized to hello, cousin? For me, it was many years of my father telling me that hate was like taking in poison to hurt someone else, and the only person you hurt was yourself. It took looking back over my life and determining who was going to stop me from accomplishing my dreams. Then it was achieving my dreams despite the obstacles. I couldn't prevent these circumstances no more than Phoebe could prevent her family from owning slaves and connecting us by blood. Therefore, it was up to Phoebe and me to start this journey of healing and restoration. On page 172, in my chapter, I Am Free, I write, when I realized that I had the ability to learn and to make good grades, there was something wrong with the many things I had assumed about myself. I had accepted as fact what some individuals in white society, teachers and others of influence had said, intentionally meaning to hurt me and keep me in a state of low self-esteem. I go on to write, I am responsible for the decisions that I make, my actions and responses to situations. I am responsible to seek the truth and acknowledge my history. Nearly 25 years later, in 2007, Phoebe, a white woman, contacts me. I thank God she waited until I was ready to take this journey with her. I needed that time to reply genuinely. Hello, cousin.
Wow. I've seen that video at least 100 times and continue to be amazed at the bravery of Betty and her family. It also prompts me to think again how easy I had it growing up. I can't think of one significant obstacle placed in my path toward getting an education. Once I met Betty and her family, it became apparent that an important anniversary was coming up, the 50th anniversary of their integrating Warren County High School. I lived nearby, and her brother James, who you saw in the film a little bit, her brother was living nearby and had formed a group, an activist group called the Historical Education Movement. And it was dedicated to honoring this history and Betty's and his father. He graciously allowed me to join the group, and we got to work right away. First thing on our agenda was pressuring the Warren County School Board to name that school after Betty and her brother's father, James Wilson Kilby. But the school board would have nothing to do with that. They were just too controversial, even 50 years later. Isn't that amazing? So when that didn't happen, we were discouraged, but we decided there's still more we could do. So we came up with the idea of getting a historic marker erected in front of the school. At least the story would not be forgotten. It would be out there on a permanent sign for all to see. And so we'll show you here a video of the dedication of that sign.
We're getting a firsthand account of what it was like during one of the most tumultuous times in Warren County history. It has been more than 50 years since school desegregation, and the students impacted came back together tonight to recognize where they came from and just how far we have come. It's a story that's new tonight from TV3's Sarah Robarge.
The principal announced our school was going to close. So at first, it would seem like a small vacation.
June Jeffrey was a senior at Warren County High School back in 1958. She says when she found out these doors might stay closed for good, it was scary.
We were seniors, and we needed to know if we were going to graduate.
June's class is called the Lost Class of 59 because many of these seniors never graduated from here. And these doors remained closed until a historic day in February 1959, a day Reverend James Kilby will never forget.
At least 150, 200 protesters, and they were hollering and screaming and telling us to go home and calling us the N-word. 16 years old, you couldn't understand why adults would treat kids that way when you wanted to get your education.
Kilby was one of the Warren County 23, the first black students who integrated Warren County High School after a judge ruled it unconstitutional to keep them out. After unveiling this marker that commemorates their fight for equality, Kilby, Jeffrey, and other members of the Warren County 23 and the Lost Class of 59 walked together through the doors of their high school for the first time in 50 years.
It's a sign of unity, walking up the hill together, being together. We've come a great way. We still have ways to go, but I just believe that we can work together now. It has broken down some of the things that have stood in our way to be here today.
I rejoice today because I've been through the struggle, and now today was peaceful, a day where we could celebrate.
In Warren County, Sarah Robarge, TV3 News.
And an emotional moment for sure. The marker is set right outside of the former Warren County High School, which is now the middle school. You can see it as you drive along Luray Avenue.
That assisting in this effort to get recognition of the Kilbys through the sign that we saw was placed in front of the school might be considered one form of reparations. But I recognize that it was not enough. I began to ask Betty and her brother what more I could do. They were reluctant to suggest anything, but then I came up with the idea of a scholarship fund. Now, this was something that they could accept because it was for their grandchildren. Those would be the persons who would benefit. So in 2014, I established the Kilby Family Endowed Scholarship that benefits descendants of persons my family enslaved. I set it up at the Poise Foundation, which has done a wonderful job of administering it. And just so you know, as Kara said, for every copy of Cousins you purchase, our author's proceeds are donated to that scholarship fund. So now it is time for us to stop talking and open up this conversation to hear what you have to say and to answer your questions. We'd be glad to answer any question you pose, no matter how challenging, about our story and about our new book.
Thank you, Phoebe and Betty. So you mentioned, Phoebe, that all of the proceeds from the book come to the scholarship fund. Why was it so important for you to set this fund up?
Well, I knew that my family had harmed Betty's family through enslavement. And not just that, everything since, during Jim Crow, up till today. And I participated in this, and I felt that I should make amends in some way. And this would be a way to do it, to give back. And since the Kilbys cared so much about education, setting up a scholarship fund seemed particularly appropriate.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's just rewind a little bit. And Betty, for you, what did you think about when you got that call? You handled it in a way that might surprise other people. Why were you so open to the relationship with Phoebe?
I had reconciled the fact that I came from slavery. And I had achieved just about every dream that I had in writing the book. Writing the book was freeing. And then being able to succeed in the workplace. So everything that Phoebe had told me were things that I knew, but I just didn't want to do any research in that area. Wasn't looking forward to finding out who was who. There was a Kilby. Her name was Betty Kilby, and she was from Rappahannock County, and she was white, and she made the honor roll. So I would cut the newspaper article about her successes and put it up on my mirror in my bedroom as if I had made the honor roll. So by the time Phoebe came along and Phoebe told me, I was ready to hear the information and to deal with it.
So Phoebe, you talked about how you were kind of coached into making that initial call to Betty. Were you afraid? Were you concerned that she wouldn't be willing to talk with you?
Yes, indeed. I was afraid she wouldn't want to talk to me. I knew I wasn't really fearful, but I was not sure what to expect, I would say. I knew that, I just assumed that there would be resentments on her part to someone who was descended from people who had once enslaved her family. And putting myself in her shoes, I would go, I don't want to talk to that woman. But when I read her book, Wit, Will, and Walls, and I could see that this was a person who had lived through a lot, but had worked through a lot of those, through her trauma, and had called on God often to help her. And I'd also seen her talk about or read how she her father talked about forgiving your enemies or people who've hurt you. So I knew there was a possibility that maybe she'd want to talk to me.
Thank you. And for you, Betty, you mentioned how your brothers questioned, why would you even want to meet somebody who enslaved your ancestors? Why would you want to meet Phoebe? Did you ever change their minds about confronting this part of your past?
Two of my brothers, I changed their mind. My brother James, he had written a book too, and I think when you get it out of the inside of you, when you get it out of you, then you're more likely to be able to accept it. So my brother James, after he had sat one-on-one and talked to Phoebe, he was ready. Some of the other family members still have not come to grips with it, have not come to do what we've done. The younger generation, my nieces and nephews, especially the ones that are now benefiting from the scholarship, have come over and had a different feeling.
Wow, thank you. So Phoebe, you mentioned that you were surprised that your family actually owned slaves. And some people think if they never enslaved someone or were enslaved, that they really shouldn't visit that painful past. Why was it so important for you to face it? And can you tell us a little bit about your journey towards reconciliation?
Well, certainly there are European Americans whose family arrived in this country after slavery. So they didn't participate in it. But I contend that all of us that have lived within this culture have been, are suspended kind of in a stew of racism in some ways. It's throughout our culture, something I believe. And I know that it continued far beyond slavery into the Jim Crow era. For example, I found information about my family in Rappahannock County, serving on the school board and administering segregated schools. So it wasn't just slavery, it was afterwards. Then I found that my father, when he studied medicine at the University of Virginia, he was actually taught eugenics in medical school. And then I look at myself, and I was sent to a white private school. I lived in a white neighborhood. I went to a white church. I did not have much interaction with African Americans. And when my school was integrated, I look at myself and I really didn't reach out to the two young women who came into my class. Remember in the video how one of the commentators talks about how none of the white children reached out to Betty? Well, I was one of those people in my own school. I did not reach out. So I look at myself and I see I was impacted by racism, and I took some of this in. And I know that I have racism in me that I work on every day and try to be an anti-racist. And that's why I think all of us that are European American need to look at ourselves and think about that, and think about the oppression of African Americans over time to the present. And perhaps that will encourage people to look at the things the way I do, maybe not all, and see the need for reparations.
Thank you. So we have a question coming in the chat, and maybe I'll throw this to both of you, and you can answer. Maybe you, Betty, first, and Phoebe, you second. It's a question about reparations, and we know that for you all, a way, and for you in particular, Phoebe, a way that you thought about reparations is the establishment of the scholarship fund. But the question in the chat is, what are some other ways, and what are other ways that you think reparations should look like. How do you think reparations should show up now in the US? And so I'll throw that to each of you.
I think that reparations should be a national project. I think that society, the rules of government was meant to keep us down. And even with Brown v. Board, it provided scholarships for us, the 23 students in Front Royal, but also the students who brought about the first desegregation in Norfolk and Arlington and Charlottesville. I believe that the government should provide education for the descendants of slaves. There's nothing you can do for me. I'm 75 years old. I have a doctor's degree. And there's nothing that anybody can do to me to make amends. So I think that something should be done at the national level.
I agree with Betty. And there are lots of scholars, particularly, and people that believe that the only way to implement reparations is at the national level. Many of you may have heard about Dr. William Darity at Duke University, who's done a lot of work on what that should look like. And he believes that some of the reparations efforts done on the personal and community level might be a distraction. I guess I have to say that when I started thinking about this, I figured that, it might be a long time before the nation gets to this. It's making some progress in Congress right now, but at the time back in 2014, there was really no hope. And I thought, well, if I don't do anything, then I'm kind of letting myself off the hook. So I went ahead and did this. And I know there's some communities out there now, like Knoxville, Tennessee, and Asheville, North Carolina, and others that are starting doing it at a community level. I guess my perspective is I don't see how that really hurts the movement. I'm hopeful that we'll still be able to go ahead and do reparations by the federal government at the national level and start that conversation soon.
Thank you. It looks like we have a question in the chat, and I think this is for you, Betty. And it says, can you explain a little bit more about your forgiveness journey and your, being able to really reach out and talk to Phoebe and call her? So maybe a little bit more about your journey of forgiveness.
Now, if you haven't guessed, you probably already know that I believe in God. And I believe in the principles of the Bible. And we were brought up believing in the principles of the Bible. It was so hard for me personally to forgive. In fact, the ladies in my mission group used to laugh at me because when we went over the lessons of forgiveness, and they asked me, and I would have to tell them. Well, during my journey, I went to a church that gave you a glimpse of hell. And they showed people from various walks of life, good people who donated and gave, but yet they did not forgive in their hearts, and they did not have love in their hearts for people who were different. And I went and I saw those people in hell, and I saw they dramatized them as gashing their teeth, and they were in hell, and they were sorry, and it was a place that they couldn't get out of. And when I came out of there and I thought about hell, I came back and I told my mission sisters that when I took a look at hell, I wasn't going to let my hate for anybody to send me to a place like that. And so it became my mission in life to love and to forgive. And finally, as my daddy said, to take a hold of Dr. Martin Luther King's dream.
Thank you. Thank you. We have another question in the chat, and it's about the criteria for the scholarship fund. And so maybe, Betty, if you want to, or excuse me, Phoebe, if you want to take a moment and just talk about the criteria, because I think it speaks to the heart of the work, that you all are doing through this fund. So maybe you can just share a little bit about the criteria and why it was so important to kind of formulate it in this way.
Well, I have to say that I came up with some ideas, but I always ran them by Betty and her brother James to see if they thought that what I was coming up with would feel it was reparations, because I really do feel it's important for African Americans to define what reparations should look like, and then for European Americans like me to follow those cues. So basically what we ended up with is we wanted the scholarship benefits any person descended from persons who were enslaved in 3 counties where my family lived. And those are Rappahannock, Culpeper, and Madison counties, Virginia. But we give special preference to people who were descended from my family's slaves. So to qualify, you need to show that you are descended from enslaved persons in those counties or my family. But we realized that puts a lot of burden on people to do a lot of research. So we have made public and put on a special website all the information we have about descendants of persons my family enslaved. And when we learn anything more about others enslaved in those counties, we'll add it to the website. So to qualify, all you have to do is show that you are descended from slaves in those counties or from my family. And we already have a lot of the documentation. So in many cases, all the applicant has to show is a birth certificate, because we know their parentage. And we designed it so it wasn't at any one university. That's why I like the Poise Foundation, because that would give the applicant the choice of which college they wanted to go to. And so we have had applicants going to all colleges all over the country, the ones that they chose to go to. And it can go, the scholarship money can go to someone attending a 2-year school or a 4-year school. And you can get it multiple years for all the time that you're in college. So it's not just 1 year. So that's some of the criteria we set up for this. Hope that I answered the question.
It does, and it looks like we have one more question, and this might be our last question. And the question is for both of you. How did each of your families react to this situation? Does everybody get along?
I guess I'll start. I have siblings that don't always get along, even though my father always preached to us growing up about loving one another. So no, we don't always get along. I can say that from my children who are receiving the scholarship, I have 3 grandchildren that will be receiving the scholarship this year. And they love what we're doing.
Well, when I started this research and was looking into my family enslaving people, people in my father's generation, there was only one person left, my Aunt Lucia, and she married into the family. So it wasn't her family doing the enslaving. But she was also a historian. She was glad to give me lots of information that was very helpful. So I at that level, I didn't have pushback. I'm sure my father is probably rolling in his grave, but that's just the way it is. Now, as far as my generation, all my cousins so far have been very accepting. I've not heard anybody upset that I connected with Betty. In fact, my cousins are donating to the scholarship fund. As I have one sister, and she's donating to the scholarship fund. So far, none of my family has objected. And as far as this topic, we all get along with regard to connecting with Betty and her family and the scholarship endowment.
Thank you. We are getting so much great comments and things in the chat. People are thanking you, Betty, for sharing your story. Phoebe, they appreciate your level of accountability, and your willingness to kind of step up and try to make right from a very harmful and devastating situation. So thank you both for taking the time to join with us this evening and share your story. I know I personally have been touched by your story, and you all have inspired me to even begin to look into my own ancestry. And I've been doing a lot of great research and learning a lot and sharing that with my family. And they've been very appreciative of that. And so I thank you for the ways in which you're inspiring all of us to think about our past and to embrace it and to use that as a way to move forward. So thank you again for sharing your intriguing story. And you can find out so much more about both Betty and Phoebe Kilby on our website. And if you just Google them, all kinds of things will come up. You'll get articles and videos. And there's just so much interest and energy around the authenticity of their story and their love for each other, as well as their community. So as a reminder, the first 50 donors who make an unrestricted gift to Poise Foundation will receive a free copy of the book Cousins. We just ask that you put Cousins in the memo line when you make your donation. We invite you to join us online on June 24th as we continue our anniversary celebration. We're going to have a community conversation featuring Tammy Thompson, who's the executive director of Catapult Greater Pittsburgh, and Charlize Smith, who's founder of Willie's Agency for Vision and Empowerment, better known as WAVE. So please come out and join us and join in all of the conversations that we're going to be having throughout the course of this year in honor of our 40th anniversary. Thank you again for supporting tonight's event and Poise throughout the years. Join me in giving a special thank you to Betty and Phoebe for coming and sharing with us about their book. Thank you all so much and have a great night.